The bitter winter wind howled through the empty streets of Chicago as Alex huddled deeper into the doorway of an old brick building. At just 12 years old, he had already learned how to spot the safest places to sleep, away from other homeless people, hidden from police patrols, but close enough to busy areas where he could find food in the morning. He pulled his thin jacket tighter, wishing it could do more against the cold. The jacket was one of the last things his grandmother had bought him before she passed away 3 months ago. The memory of her still brought tears to his eyes. She had tried so hard to give him a good life, working 2 jobs even when her arthritis made her hands shake so bad she could barely button her uniform. The backpack beside him contained everything he owned now. A few clothes from the shelter, a half-empty water bottle, and his most precious possession, a crumpled photograph of his mother. He pulled it out carefully, trying not to tear the worn edges. In the photo, she was smiling, her eyes bright and kind, nothing like the last time he'd seen her when he was 4. Back then, her eyes had been distant, unfocused, as she kissed him goodbye and promised to return after getting help. That was 8 years ago. Alex had learned to survive on his own since his grandmother's death. During the day, he'd hang around the library, using their bathroom to wash up and reading books to pass the time. The librarians probably suspected he was homeless, but they were kind enough not to ask questions. One of them, an older lady with silver hair, sometimes left granola bars on the table where he usually sat. At night, he'd search through restaurant dumpsters for food that was still good. He knew which places threw out whole sandwiches and which bakeries disposed of their day-old bread. It wasn't a great life, but he was managing. Some of the other homeless kids had tried to get him to join their group, but Alex preferred being alone. He'd seen how quickly groups could turn on each other when food was scarce or the police started asking questions. The sound of distant sirens made him sink further into the shadows. The police weren't bad people. One officer had even given him a warm burger last week, but they'd take him to social services if they found him. Alex couldn't risk that. He'd heard too many horror stories about foster homes from other street kids. Besides, he had a mission. Every day, he looked for his mother's face in the crowd, hoping she'd come back clean and sober like she'd promised. He took out his mother's photo again, tracing her face with his finger. The photo was getting blurry from being handled so much, but he could still make out her warm smile, her long dark hair, and the small birthmark near her left eye. Sometimes, when he was really hungry or cold, he'd make up stories about where she might be. Maybe she'd gotten better and was looking for him too. Maybe she had a good job now and a nice house where they could live together. The sound of laughter from a nearby restaurant made his stomach growl. The smell of fresh bread and grilled meat drifted through the air, reminding him that he hadn't eaten since morning. He checked his watch, a cheap digital one he found in the lost and found box at the library. It was almost closing time for the restaurants. Soon, he'd be able to check their dumpsters for something to eat. As he waited, Alex pulled out his notebook, another library find, and wrote down his daily observations. He'd started doing this after reading about scientists keeping journals. It helped him remember which places were safe, which people were kind, and most importantly, any signs that might lead him to his mother. Tonight's entry would be short. Day 97 without Grandma. Still looking for Mom. The nice bakery lady gave me a whole bag of cookies today. Tomorrow, I'll try the north side of town. Little did Alex know that tomorrow would change his life forever, starting with a lost wallet that would unlock secrets he never imagined. The morning sun was just beginning to warm the city streets when Alex started his daily routine. He'd learned that early mornings were the best time to check behind restaurants, before the garbage trucks came, but after the late-night staff had thrown out leftover food. As he walked down the alley behind Luigi's Italian restaurant, his stomach rumbled at the smell of garlic and fresh bread still lingering in the air. That's when he noticed something unusual glinting in the morning light near the dumpster. At first, he thought it might be a candy wrapper, but as he got closer, he saw it was a wallet. and not just any wallet, but the kind he'd seen wealthy businessmen carry. It was made of soft brown leather that felt smooth under his fingers, nothing like the worn-out canvas ones he usually found discarded in the trash. Alex looked around carefully. Living on the streets had taught him to be cautious. Sometimes things that looked like good luck were actually traps. But the alley was empty except for a stray cat watching him from behind a stack of empty boxes. His hands trembled slightly as he picked up the wallet. It felt heavy, and he could see crisp bills peeking out from inside. "Maybe this is my lucky day," he whispered to himself, though something in his gut told him keeping it wouldn't be right. His grandmother's words echoed in his mind. "Being poor doesn't mean we can't be honest, baby." Opening the wallet, Alex found several credit cards, a business card for a big tech company, and a thick wad of $100 bills. More money than he ever seen in his life. He thought about all the food he could buy, maybe even a warm coat for the coming winter. But as he dug deeper into the wallet's compartments, his heart suddenly stopped. There, tucked behind a driver's license, was a photograph that made his hands shake so hard he almost dropped the wallet. It was his mother, the same photo he carried in his backpack, but this one was newer, clearer. In this version, she wasn't alone. A tall man in an expensive suit stood beside her, his arm around her shoulders, both of them smiling at the camera as if they didn't have a care in the world. Alex pulled out his own worn photo to compare them. There was no doubt. It was the same woman, the same smile, even the same small birthmark near her left eye. His mind raced with questions. Who was this man? How did he know his mother? And most importantly, why did he have her picture? The sound of a car door slamming nearby snapped Alex back to reality. He quickly looked at the driver's license and the wallet. The name read Thomas Chen, and there was an address for a fancy downtown building he passed many times while collecting cans. The face in the ID matched the man in the photo with his mother. Alex's heart pounded as he heard footsteps approaching the alley. He should run. That's what his street instincts were screaming at him to do. Run and keep the wallet, or at least the money. But the photo of his mother seemed to be pulling him in another direction, toward answers he'd been searching for since she disappeared. The footsteps grew closer. Alex took a deep breath and made his decision. He stepped out from behind the dumpster, wallet clutched tightly in his hand. A well-dressed man was walking quickly down the alley, his eyes scanning the ground. When he looked up and saw Alex, he stopped abruptly. Their eyes met, and for a moment, time seemed to freeze. Alex recognized him immediately from the photo. It was Thomas Chen, though his face looked more worried now than in the smiling picture with Alex's mother. The man's eyes moved from Alex's face to the wallet in his hands, and something flickered across his expression. Relief, certainly, but also something else, something Alex couldn't quite read. What Alex didn't know was that this moment, this simple act of finding a lost wallet, was about to unravel a story 8 years in the making. As he stood there in the alley, holding not just a wallet, but possibly the key to his past, the morning sun cast long shadows behind him, like fingers of fate pointing toward a future he never could have imagined. Thomas Chen stood frozen in the alley, his eyes fixed on the small figure before him. The boy couldn't have been more than 12 or 13, wearing clothes that had clearly seen better days. But it was the look in the boy's eyes that caught Thomas off guard, a mixture of determination and uncertainty that seemed oddly familiar. "I found your wallet, sir," Alex said quietly, holding it out with slightly trembling hands. The morning air felt thick with tension as Thomas slowly stepped forward. He'd been frantically searching for the past hour, retracing his steps from last night's business dinner, worried sick about the irreplaceable photo he kept inside. "Thank you," Thomas replied, his voice gentle as he took the wallet. He opened it quickly, checking its contents. Everything was there: the credit cards, the cash, and most importantly, the photograph. He looked up sharply when he noticed the boy hadn't left. Most kids would have run off by now, especially after returning something so valuable. "You're very honest," Thomas said, pulling out several $100 bills. "Please take this as a reward." But Alex didn't reach for the money. Instead, he pulled something from his own worn backpack, a folded, worn photograph. Thomas's heart nearly stopped when the boy carefully unfolded it. "Sir," Alex's voice wavered slightly. "I need to ask you something. This woman in your wallet, she's my mother." He held up his own photo, and Thomas felt the world tilt beneath his feet. The same woman, the same smile, just years earlier. His hands began to shake as he looked more closely at the boy's face. Those eyes, that determined set of the jaw. How had he not seen it immediately? "Your mother," Thomas repeated softly, his mind racing. "What's your name?" When Alex told him, Thomas had to lean against the alley wall for support. He remembered Angela mentioning a son named Alex, just once, during their brief relationship 8 years ago. But she'd been so vague, and when she disappeared. "I've been looking for her," Alex continued, his voice stronger now. "She left when I was 4. Been living with my grandmother until—" He trailed off, and Thomas noticed how the boy's shoulders hunched slightly, protecting himself from painful memories. The pieces were falling into place in Thomas's mind. The timing, the resemblance, the way Angela had suddenly vanished from his life after he proposed. He'd hired private investigators, but they'd never found her. He'd kept her photo all these years, unable to let go of the questions, the mystery of why she'd run. "Alex," Thomas said carefully, fighting to keep his voice steady. "When exactly did your mother leave?" As Alex shared the date, Thomas felt his knees weaken. It was the same week Angela had disappeared from his life. The same week he found her apartment empty, with only a note saying she was sorry but had to go. A police car drove by the alley entrance, its siren briefly wailing, making Alex jump. Thomas noticed how the boy's eyes darted toward the exit, like a wild animal ready to bolt. "Wait," Thomas said quickly. "Please don't go. I think we need to talk." He could see the struggle on Alex's face, the street-smart instinct to run warring with the desperate need for answers about his mother. Thomas knew he had to handle this carefully. This wasn't just about finding his lost wallet anymore. This was about finding something far more precious. "There's a diner around the corner," Thomas said, gesturing toward the street. "Would you let me buy you breakfast? We can talk somewhere warm, and you can tell me everything you remember about your mother." He watched as Alex weighed his options, clearly suspicious, but also hungry for more than just food. "The diner has security cameras," Alex said suddenly, showing a street wisdom beyond his years. "And lots of people inside." Thomas nodded, understanding the boy's need for safety. "Yes, it's always busy this time of morning. You can sit near the door if you want, and leave any time." Finally, Alex nodded. As they walked toward the diner, Thomas felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. Here was Angela's son, their son, who'd been living on the streets while Thomas had been in his penthouse apartment, never knowing they were in the same city. The questions multiplied with each step they took, but one thing was clear. Nothing in either of their lives would ever be the same after this morning. The bell above the diner door chimed as Thomas and Alex walked in. The warm smell of coffee and bacon wrapped around them, and Alex's stomach growled loudly enough for Thomas to hear. The boy looked embarrassed, but Thomas pretended not to notice as he led them to a corner booth where Alex could keep an eye on both the door and the window. "Order anything you want," Thomas said, watching as Alex's eyes grew wide at the menu prices. The waitress came over, her name tag reading Betty, and smiled warmly at them. Alex ordered cautiously at first, just toast and eggs, but with Thomas's gentle encouragement, he added pancakes, bacon, and a large hot chocolate with extra whipped cream. While they waited for their food, Thomas pulled out his phone and opened the security footage from his restaurant. He'd had his tech team install the best cameras after a break-in last year. "Would you mind if I looked at something?" he asked Alex, who nodded while fidgeting with his napkin. The footage showed Alex approaching the wallet, his initial hesitation, and then the moment he discovered the photograph. Thomas watched the boy's face on the screen as he compared the two pictures and felt his throat tighten with emotion. There was no denying it. Every gesture, every expression reminded him of Angela. "Sir," Alex said suddenly, his voice quiet but firm. "Are you my father?" The question hung in the air as Betty arrived with their food. Thomas waited until she left before answering, using the moment to gather his thoughts. "I honestly don't know," Thomas replied, deciding that truth was the best approach. "But I think it's possible. Your mother, Angela, and I were together 8 years ago. She disappeared suddenly, and I never knew why. I hired people to find her, but she was just gone." Alex took a big bite of pancake, seeming to need the comfort of food before continuing. "She was sick," he said finally. "Not like cold sick, but in her head. Grandma said she needed help, but she was scared to get it. Said people would judge her." Thomas felt a piece of the puzzle click into place. Angela had always been private about her struggles, but he'd noticed the signs, the anxiety, the mood swings, the times she'd disappear for days without explanation. He tried to help, but she pushed him away. "I have a team of private investigators," Thomas said carefully, watching Alex's reaction. "They're very good at finding people. If you're willing, maybe they could help us look for her together. We could also—" He hesitated, then continued, "We could do a DNA test to answer your question about whether I'm your father." Alex stopped eating, his fork hovering above his plate. "What happens if you are?" he asked, and Thomas could hear the fear behind the question. Fear of hope, fear of disappointment, fear of change. "Then," Thomas said softly, "you'd never have to sleep in a doorway again. You'd have a home, food, clothes. But more importantly, you'd have family. Someone to help you look for your mom, to take care of you, to be there for you. And if you're not," Alex's voice was barely a whisper. "Then I'd still want to help you," Thomas replied without hesitation. "Because either way, you're Angela's son, and she was very special to me. Plus," he added with a small smile, "anyone honest enough to return a wallet full of cash deserves a chance at a better life." Alex took another bite of pancake, but Thomas could see tears gathering in the boy's eyes. He pretended to be very interested in his coffee, giving Alex a moment to compose himself. Outside, the morning rush hour was in full swing, people hurrying past the diner window, unaware of the life-changing conversation happening inside. "I have a picture of her," Thomas said suddenly, pulling out his phone. "From later, after the one in my wallet. Would you like to see it?" Alex nodded eagerly, and Thomas pulled up a photo he'd kept hidden away for years. It showed Angela at a charity event, just weeks before she disappeared. Her smile was strained, but her eyes were still bright with the spark that had first drawn Thomas to her. As Alex stared at the photo, memorizing every detail of his mother's face, Thomas made a silent promise. Whatever it took, whatever resources he had to use, he would help this boy find the answers they both needed. The truth about Angela, about Alex's parentage, about what had happened 8 years ago. It was all out there somewhere, waiting to be discovered. The next few days passed in a blur for Alex. After their breakfast at the diner, Thomas had insisted on getting him proper medical care. The doctor's office was fancier than any building Alex had ever been in, with soft chairs and paintings on the walls. While they waited for the DNA test results, Thomas had arranged for Alex to stay in a youth shelter he trusted. Not perfect, but safer than the streets. Today, exactly 1 week after finding the wallet, Alex sat in Thomas's office on the 40th floor of a glass skyscraper. The view of the city made him feel like he was floating above his old life. He could even see the library where he used to spend his days, looking tiny from up here. "The results are in," Thomas said quietly, holding a white envelope. His hands were shaking slightly as he opened it. Alex held his breath, his heart pounding so hard he thought it might burst out of his chest. The past week had been like a dream. Clean clothes, regular meals, people actually listening when he spoke. Part of him was terrified it would all disappear. Thomas read the paper silently, his expression changing from tension to shock to something Alex couldn't quite read. Then, without saying a word, he walked around his big desk and sat in the chair next to Alex. "I am your father," he said simply, his voice rough with emotion. Alex felt the world spin around him. Even though he'd suspected it, having it confirmed made everything suddenly real. A tear rolled down his cheek before he could stop it. "But that's not all," Thomas continued, pulling out a folder from his desk. "The private investigators found something about your mother." Alex sat up straighter, wiping his eyes quickly. "She's alive, Alex. She's been in a rehabilitation center in California for the past 3 years." The words hit Alex like a wave. Alive. His mother was alive. Not just alive, but getting help. The help she'd promised to get all those years ago. His hands trembled as Thomas showed him the report. "She's been doing really well," Thomas explained gently. "She's been clean for 2 years, as a job at the center helping other patients. And," he paused, taking a deep breath, "she's been trying to find you. The investigators found letters she'd written to your grandmother's old address, but by then Grandma had passed away," Alex finished quietly. He thought about all the times he imagined finding his mother, all the different scenarios he'd played out in his head. But he'd never imagined this, sitting in a millionaire's office, discovering she'd been looking for him too. "Can we?" Alex's voice cracked. He cleared his throat and tried again. "Can we go see her?" Thomas nodded, smiling through his own tears. "I've already arranged it. But first, there's something else we need to do." He pressed a button on his desk phone. "Could you come in now, please?" The office door opened, and a woman in a smart business suit walked in, carrying a briefcase. "Alex, this is Mrs. Chen, my lawyer. She's here to help us start the adoption process, if that's what you want. We'll need to work with social services, and there will be lots of paperwork, but—" "Yes," Alex said quickly, then looked embarrassed at interrupting. "I mean, if you really want to." "I really want to," Thomas assured him. "I've missed 8 years of your life. I don't want to miss another day." He turned to the lawyer. "Also, we'll need to arrange a trip to California. I think it's time this family had a proper reunion." As Mrs. Chen began explaining the legal process, Alex looked at the city spread out below them. Somewhere out there was the alley where he'd found the wallet, the doorway where he used to sleep, the library where he'd spent countless hours dreaming of a better life. It felt like a lifetime ago, even though it had only been a week. His hand went to his backpack, where he still kept his mother's worn photograph. Soon, he wouldn't need it anymore. Soon, he'd have the real thing. And not just his mother, but a father too. A whole family he never knew he had. The future stretched out before him, bright and full of possibilities. All because of a lost wallet and a photograph that connected 3 lost souls across time and distance. The California sun felt different from Chicago's. Warmer, gentler somehow. Alex stood outside the rehabilitation center, his new shoes planted firmly on the concrete path leading to the entrance. Thomas stood beside him, one hand resting supportively on his shoulder. "Are you ready?" Thomas asked softly. Alex nodded, though his stomach was doing backflips. He wore new clothes, a blue button-down shirt and khaki pants that still felt strange after years of worn hand-me-downs. In his pocket, he carried both photographs of his mother, though they were creased and soft from being held so many times. The rehabilitation center looked nothing like Alex had imagined. Instead of a cold, hospital-like building, it was a collection of warm, adobe-style structures surrounded by gardens. Flowers bloomed everywhere, and he could hear a fountain splashing somewhere nearby. "Your mother doesn't know we're coming," Thomas explained again as they walked toward the main building. "The center director thought it would be better if we surprised her. She's been doing so well here, helping other patients, leading group sessions. They say she talks about you all the time. Alex's throat felt tight. What if? He started, then stopped walking. What if she's disappointed? What if I'm not what she remembers? Thomas knelt down to meet Alex's eyes. Listen to me, he said gently. Your mother has kept your photo with her all these years, just like you kept hers. She's written dozens of letters trying to find you. Trust me, the only thing that could disappoint her is if she never got to see you again. They walked into the building, where a kind-faced woman was waiting for them. Angela's in the garden, she said softly. She's leading her morning meditation group. Would you like to see her? Following the director through a maze of corridors, they emerged into a sunlit courtyard. And there she was. Alex's heart nearly stopped when he saw her. His mother sat on a wooden bench, surrounded by a small group of people. Her hair was shorter than in the photographs, with strands of gray at the temples, but her smile was exactly the same. She was speaking quietly to the group, her voice carrying clearly in the morning air. Remember, healing isn't just about getting better. It's about becoming who you were always meant to be. The director stepped forward. Angela, you have some visitors. His mother looked up, her eyes moving first to Thomas, and Alex saw the shock of recognition flash across her face, then to Alex. For a moment, she just stared, her hand rising to cover her mouth. Then she whispered, so softly Alex could barely hear it, "My baby." Alex couldn't wait any longer. He ran forward, and his mother stood just in time to catch him in her arms. She smelled like garden flowers and something else, something that triggered a memory so deep it made him cry. The scent of home, of being little, of feeling safe. "I'm so sorry," she whispered into his hair, her tears falling onto his new shirt. "I'm so sorry. I had to get better. I had to become someone who deserved you." "I found your picture," Alex said through his tears. "In Thomas's wallet. He's my dad. Did you know?" Angela pulled back slightly, looking from Alex to Thomas, who still stood quietly by the garden entrance. "I suspected," she said softly. "That's part of why I left. I was so messed up then, so afraid of ruining everything. I thought if I got help first." She shook her head. "I was wrong to leave. So wrong." "But you did get help," Alex said firmly. "You did what you promised. You got better." Thomas stepped forward then, and Angela reached out one hand to him, keeping her other arm tight around Alex. "I should have told you," she said. "About him. About everything." "We have time," Thomas replied gently. "We have all the time in the world to figure this out." Around them, the garden buzzed with life. Bees visiting flowers, birds singing in the trees, the fountain providing a gentle backdrop to their reunion. Alex stood in the circle of his mother's arm, feeling his father's hand on his shoulder, and knew that this was just the beginning of their story. The lost wallet that had brought them together now sat in Thomas's office, carefully preserved as a reminder that sometimes the biggest miracles start with the smallest moments. 3 months after the reunion in California, Alex sat at the breakfast table in Thomas's penthouse apartment. No, their apartment, he reminded himself. He was still getting used to calling it home. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, making the whole kitchen glow. "Don't forget your lunch," Thomas called from the kitchen counter, where he was packing Alex's favorite sandwich. It had become their morning routine, Thomas making lunch while Alex ate breakfast before school. A routine. Something Alex hadn't had since his grandmother passed away. "Dad?" Alex said the word carefully. He'd started using it last week, and it still felt new on his tongue. Thomas looked up immediately, a smile spreading across his face. He never seemed to get tired of hearing it. "Can I ask you something?" "Anything," Thomas replied, coming to sit across from him at the table. "Mom's coming home next week," Alex said, pushing his cereal around with his spoon. Are you nervous?" The rehabilitation center had finally cleared Angela for outpatient treatment, and she was moving back to Chicago. They'd spent the past 3 months visiting her every weekend, flying to California on Thomas's private plane, something that still amazed Alex every time. Thomas was quiet for a moment, stirring his coffee thoughtfully. "A little," he admitted, "but mostly excited. Your mom has worked so hard to get better. Did you know she's going to help start a support program here in Chicago for other parents trying to get clean?" Alex nodded proudly. His mother had told him about her plans during their last visit. She was different now, stronger, more present, her eyes clear and focused when she talked about the future. She'd shown him the journal she kept, filled with letters she'd written to him over the years but never sent. "The guest room is all ready for her," Thomas continued. Though, he hesitated, then smiled. "I was thinking maybe it's time to look for a house. Somewhere with a yard, maybe. What do you think?" Alex's eyes widened. "Really? Could I have a dog?" The words tumbled out before he could stop them. He'd never dared ask for a pet before. Thomas laughed. "We'll talk about it. First, let's focus on getting your mom settled." He checked his watch. "Time for school. Remember, we're meeting with your teacher after class today." As they rode the elevator down to the lobby, Alex thought about how different his life was now. He went to a good school, had clean clothes, never worried about his next meal. But more than that, he had his family back. It wasn't perfect. There were still awkward moments, difficult conversations, times when the past felt too heavy to carry. But they were trying, all three of them. The doorman smiled and waved as they crossed the lobby. "Have a good day at school, young man," he called out. Alex waved back, remembering how just a few months ago, he would have been afraid to even walk through these fancy doors. Outside, the Chicago morning was crisp and clear. As they walked to the car, Alex spotted a homeless man sitting on a bench. Without hesitation, Thomas stopped and pulled out his wallet, giving the man enough money for a hot meal and directions to a nearby shelter. "You do that a lot now," Alex observed as they got into the car. Thomas started the engine, his expression thoughtful. "Finding you changed everything," he said simply. "Made me see things differently. That's why I started the foundation, remember?" Alex nodded. The Chen Family Foundation, dedicated to helping homeless youth and families affected by addiction. Thomas had launched it last month, with Alex and Angela's input on how to best help people in similar situations. "Mom says everyone deserves a second chance," Alex said, looking out the window at the city streets he once called home. "She's right," Thomas agreed. "And sometimes those second chances come in unexpected ways, like a lost wallet." He smiled at Alex in the rearview mirror. "Though I think I'm the one who really got lucky that day." As they drove to school, Alex thought about the 2 photographs he used to carry everywhere. They were framed now, sitting on his bedside table, a reminder of where he'd been and how far they'd all come. But he didn't need them the same way anymore. The real thing was so much better than any picture could ever be. The day Angela moved back to Chicago, the sky opened up with the kind of gentle spring rain that makes everything feel fresh and new. Alex stood at the airport terminal window, watching his mother's plane land while Thomas paced nervously beside him. "Look what I made," Alex said, pulling out a handmade welcome home sign from his backpack. He'd spent hours on it in art class, decorating it with drawings of their family, 3 stick figures holding hands under a bright sun. His teacher had helped him write, "Welcome home, Mom," in big, colorful letters. The reunion area was crowded with other families waiting for their loved ones. But Alex spotted his mother the moment she walked through the security doors. She looked different from her days at the rehabilitation center, more confident, wearing a professional-looking blue dress and carrying a small suitcase. When she saw them, her whole face lit up. "My boys," she said, wrapping them both in a tight hug. Alex breathed in her familiar scent, no longer afraid she might disappear again. This time, he knew she was here to stay. The drive home was filled with excited chatter. Angela couldn't stop smiling at the sight of the city she'd left behind. "Everything looks the same," she said, "but different too. Like seeing an old friend after many years." "Wait till you see the house," Alex burst out, unable to contain his excitement any longer. Thomas shot him a playful warning look in the rearview mirror. It was supposed to be a surprise. "House?" Angela asked, raising an eyebrow. "I thought I was staying in the apartment." "Well," Thomas said, taking a different turn than the one that led to his penthouse, "we thought maybe it was time for a fresh start. Somewhere we could all begin together." 20 minutes later, they pulled up to a beautiful brick house with a wraparound porch and a big yard. Flower beds lined the walkway, though they were empty now, waiting to be planted. A swing hung from a sturdy oak tree in the front yard. "It's perfect," Angela whispered, tears forming in her eyes as they walked up to the front door. Then she noticed the small sign next to the doorbell. The Chen family. Inside, the house was warm and welcoming, with large windows letting in natural light and comfortable furniture that looked nothing like the sleek, modern pieces in Thomas's old apartment. Alex couldn't wait any longer. He grabbed his mother's hand and pulled her toward the back of the house. "Look," he said proudly, pushing open a door. "This is my room." The walls were painted a soft blue, with space-themed curtains and a desk by the window where he could do his homework. But the best part was what waited on his bed: a small, wiggling brown puppy with a red bow around its neck. "Surprise," Thomas said, coming up behind them. The shelter was going to put him down because nobody wanted a three-legged puppy. "I thought maybe he deserved a second chance, just like all of us." Alex ran to the bed, scooping up the puppy, who immediately covered his face with happy kisses. "Can we name him Lucky?" he asked, looking at both his parents, and his heart swelled at being able to say that word, parents, and mean it. "I think that's perfect," Angela said, watching her son with the puppy. Then she turned to Thomas, her eyes full of emotion. "All of this, it's like a dream." "Not a dream," Thomas replied softly. "Just life, the way it should have been all along. The way it can be now." He pulled a small box from his pocket. "Which is why I wanted to ask you something." Alex looked up from playing with Lucky, his eyes wide as Thomas got down on one knee. The puppy barked excitedly, making them all laugh through their tears. "I lost you once," Thomas said to Angela. "I don't want to lose you again. We've all been given a second chance. You, me, Alex. Maybe it's time to make it official. To be the family we were always meant to be." The moment hung in the air, full of hope and possibility. Outside, the spring rain had stopped, and sunlight streamed through the windows, turning everything golden. Lucky wagged his tail, Alex held his breath, and Angela's answer filled their new home with joy. 1 year later, the garden behind the Chen family home was filled with laughter and music. White chairs lined the freshly cut grass, and fairy lights twinkled in the trees. It was Angela and Thomas's wedding day, but it felt like so much more than that. It was a celebration of their whole journey. Alex stood proudly next to Thomas at the makeshift altar, wearing a suit that matched his father's. Lucky, their three-legged dog, sat obediently beside him, sporting a tiny bow tie. The puppy had grown into a gentle, loving companion who followed Alex everywhere, especially on their weekly visits to the homeless shelter where they volunteered. "Your tie is crooked," Alex whispered to Thomas, reaching up to straighten it. His father's hands were shaking slightly. "Are you nervous?" "A little," Thomas admitted with a smile. "But the good kind of nervous. Like when we were waiting for you at the airport last year." He looked out at their gathered guests, a mix of business associates, rehabilitation center friends, and families they'd helped through their foundation. The foundation had grown beyond anything they'd imagined. In just 1 year, they'd opened 3 family shelters and 2 rehabilitation centers across Chicago. Angela ran support groups for parents in recovery, while Thomas used his business connections to create job training programs. Alex, despite being only 13, had become the face of their youth outreach program. The music changed, and everyone stood. Angela appeared at the end of the garden path, looking radiant in a simple white dress. But it wasn't just her appearance that made her beautiful. It was the confidence in her walk, the clarity in her eyes, the 2-year sobriety chip that hung on a gold chain around her neck. As she walked toward them, Alex remembered that day in the alley when he'd found the wallet. How close he'd been to running away with it, never knowing that inside was the key to finding his family. He touched his pocket, where he still carried his mother's old photograph, not because he needed it anymore, but as a reminder of how far they'd come. The ceremony was simple and honest. Thomas and Angela had written their own vows, each including promises not just to each other, but to Alex as well. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Lucky barked joyfully, making everyone laugh. During the reception, Alex stood to give a speech. He'd been practicing for weeks, but now the words flowed naturally. A year ago, I was sleeping in doorways and digging through dumpsters for food, he began, his voice clear and strong. I thought I was alone in the world, but then I found a wallet, and inside it was more than just money. It was my whole future. He looked at his parents, who held hands as they listened. My mom always says everyone deserves a second chance. My dad shows that every day through his work at the foundation. But I think sometimes life gives us more than just a second chance. It gives us exactly what we need, exactly when we need it most. The sun was setting as the party continued, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. Children from the foundation's programs played with Lucky on the lawn while their parents chatted with social workers and counselors. It was exactly what the Chen family had hoped for, not just a wedding, but a gathering of their extended family, blood-related or not. Later that evening, as the fairy lights twinkled overhead, Alex danced with his mother. "Are you happy?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. "More than happy," she said, hugging him close. "I'm grateful. Every morning I wake up and remember that this isn't a dream. That I have my son back, a wonderful husband, and work that helps others find their way home too." Thomas joined them on the dance floor, and soon they were all swaying together, Lucky circling their feet. Above them, the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. Alex thought about all the nights he'd spent on the streets, looking up at those same stars, wishing for a family. Some wishes, he realized, come true in the most unexpected ways. Sometimes they start with a lost wallet, a worn photograph, and the courage to do the right thing. But mostly, they come true because people choose love over fear, hope over despair, and the belief that every ending can be a new beginning. As the wedding festivities continued around them, the Chen family held each other close, knowing that their story wasn't just about finding each other. It was about showing others that miracles happen every day, if you just keep your heart open to possibility.